It was a calm evening in Los Angeles, the kind that you only get when the city's pulse slows just a bit. Keanu Reeves was behind the wheel of his sleek black luxury car, cruising down Sunset Boulevard. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sky. Keanu, ever the minimalist, enjoyed these quiet moments of solitude in the city that never truly sleeps. For once the world seemed to pause, leaving him to reflect on the busyness of his life, something he often wished he could escape. But that peace was short-lived. Out of nowhere, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the rearview mirror. Keanu blinked, his mind racing for a second. Had he been speeding? No, he had been careful, watching his speed, making sure to follow the rules. So what was going on? He glanced in the rear view again. The police car was right behind him, now pulling up closer, signaling for him to pull over. Confused, Keanu didn't hesitate, guiding the car to the side of the road and slowly bringing it to a stop. He sighed, his mind still spinning. "What did I do?" he muttered under his breath. The officer's silhouette appeared in the rearview mirror as the door creaked open. Keanu sat up a little straighter, wondering if it was just a routine stop, maybe a random check. But something about the way the officer walked toward him made him uneasy. It wasn't the usual methodical approach you'd expect from a police officer. There was something else in her stride. The officer reached the window and stood there for a moment, her face half hidden in the dim light, before leaning down. Keanu could see she was young, probably early 30s, her uniform crisp, but her expression curious. It was almost like she was struggling to keep her professional demeanor. "Evening. Sir," she said, her voice firm but with an undercurrent of excitement. "Can I see your license and registration?" Keanu raised an eyebrow, already feeling the tension building in his chest. He handed her his papers, his mind still working to piece together why he had been pulled over. "What's going on, officer?" "Was I speeding?" She didn't immediately respond. Instead, she glanced at the papers and then back at him with a slight tilt of her head. "You were going just fine, actually." She paused, looking him over again as if she was trying to decide something. "But there's something else, isn't there?" Keanu's mind raced. What was this about? Was there a mix-up? He had nothing on him. Nothing that could have given her any reason to be so intrigued. But her next words left him more puzzled than ever. "Are you aware of why I stopped you?" She asked, her tone suddenly more serious, yet there was something unmistakable in her eyes. Recognition. No, it couldn't be. He hadn't been speeding. He hadn't done anything wrong. Still, there was something about her that made him wonder if this was all part of something bigger. He stared at her for a moment, unsure how to answer. Something didn't feel right. But what? And just as he was about to ask her the same thing, she straightened up, giving him a small, almost shy smile. "Sorry about that, it's just, you're Keanu Reeves, aren't you?" His heart skipped a beat and suddenly everything clicked. The excitement in her voice, the way she looked at him, it wasn't about the traffic stop at all. Keanu let out a chuckle, raising his hands slightly in mock surrender. "Guilty as charged," he said, offering her a warm smile. She blinked, her expression softening. "I knew it. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to freak you out. I didn't expect this." Keanu smiled again, now understanding what had been going on. It wasn't a routine stop. She wasn't concerned about a traffic violation. She was starstruck. But that didn't answer the bigger question. Why had she stopped him in the first place? Just as he was about to ask again, she cleared her throat and straightened herself. "Out. Look, I'm sorry for the confusion, Mr. Reeves. I just didn't expect to run into you tonight, but there's something else." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Something else?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. She hesitated for a moment before leaning in just a little closer, her voice dropping slightly. "I was hoping I could let you off with just a warning, but I've got a request. Something a little unconventional. Would you be willing to take a picture with me?" Keanu blinked. A picture with him? Of course he had fans everywhere, but this was different. This wasn't some typical request. He leaned back in his seat, contemplating for a moment. He wasn't sure what was going on, but something about the whole situation intrigued him. "Why the picture?" he asked, genuinely curious. She shrugged, an awkward smile playing at the corner of her lips. "I guess I just wanted to say thank you. You've been an inspiration, Mr. Reeves. I've been following your work for years. It's just... well, it's not every day you get to pull over someone you look up to." Keanu looked at her for a long moment, his mind still processing the strange turn of events. He had been pulled over by a fan who happened to be a police officer. He could have brushed it off as just another odd Hollywood encounter, but something in the way she spoke struck him. It wasn't just admiration. There was a sense of respect, maybe even hope. He sighed, then smiled. "Sure," he said. "Why not?" As she stepped back to grab her phone, Keanu couldn't help but laugh. Maybe tonight wasn't just about a traffic stop after all. He wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but something told him this was only the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? Keanu watched as Officer Harris stepped back to her patrol car, her excitement evident in the way she fumbled with her phone. She was probably just a few years younger than him, yet the nervous energy surrounding her felt strangely familiar. The way she kept glancing back at him, probably trying to hide her enthusiasm, reminded him of a time when he had felt similarly starstruck by someone he admired. The whole situation was bizarre. He was used to being recognized in public, of course, but this wasn't like any of those moments. It wasn't just a fan asking for an autograph or a selfie. It was something else entirely. The officer had pulled him over for no real reason, asked for a photo, and now they were standing in the middle of an empty street, just two people with their own unspoken histories. As she returned to his car with her phone in hand, Keanu could see her smile widen. "Thanks for this," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "It's not every day you get a chance to meet someone you admire, and it's even rarer when you're, well, the one pulling them over." Keanu chuckled softly, trying to lighten the awkwardness. "Hey, it's a strange night, huh?" He watched, as she positioned her phone aiming to take the photo. "So, you're not really going to give me a ticket, are you?" he asked with a playful grin, though he was still a little on edge. Her eyes darted back and forth, trying to keep her composure. "Honestly, I don't think so. I don't really want to mess with you, Mr. Reeves. I mean, you're kind of a big deal, right? So I thought maybe we could just let this be a weird but memorable experience." Keanu shook his head, still finding it difficult to believe that this was actually happening. A police officer stopping him just to ask for a picture and chat. It felt surreal, almost like the beginning of a weird fan fiction. He wasn't used to this kind of spontaneity in his life. He leaned out slightly, ready for the photo, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal again. But then, just as she snapped the shot, her face softened. "You're probably wondering why I'm being so weird, huh?" she said, her voice suddenly quieter. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to piece this all together. You're not the typical cop pulling people over." She paused for a moment, biting her lip nervously, clearly debating whether or not to speak her mind. Then she took a deep breath and sat on the edge of his car, her tone turning more serious. "I've been a fan of your work for years, but it's more than that. You're not just some actor to me, Keanu. I've been following your interviews, your projects, and I don't know, the way you carry yourself. I've always admired your humility. It's not like other celebrities." Keanu listened quietly, not knowing quite what to say. He'd heard similar things from fans before, but this felt different. It felt personal, like Officer Harris had seen something in him that most people missed. I guess I've been stuck in a rut lately," she continued, her voice faltering a little. "And I've always wondered if someone like you, someone who's been through so much, could help me see things differently. You know, like, how do you stay grounded with all the fame and attention?" Her words hit him in a way he hadn't expected. He had been hearing similar thoughts from people who admired his work for years, but this was different. This wasn't just a fan admiring him from a distance. It was someone who truly seemed to understand the weight of his fame and the struggle to stay authentic despite it all. Keanu looked down at his hands for a second, then met her gaze. "It's not easy," he admitted. "There are times when it feels overwhelming and I don't know if I'm doing enough. But at the end of the day, I just try to stay true to myself. I think that's all anyone can do. It's easy to get distracted by everything around you, but I find that if I focus on the things that really matter, family, friends, and the things I'm passionate about, it helps keep me grounded." Officer Harris nodded, absorbing his words as if they carried more weight than they seemed. I think that's exactly what I needed to hear," she said softly, her expression thoughtful. "I've been so focused on being perfect at my job, trying to prove myself, that I forgot what I actually care about. I've been losing myself." Keanu felt the sincerity in her voice, and something in him shifted. He knew what it was like to lose yourself in the chaos, to feel like everything was slipping through your fingers. It was easy to get caught up in the pressure of expectations, but hearing someone else express it so openly, it felt like a reminder to him too. "I get it," he said, his tone quiet but compassionate. "It's hard when you feel like you have to be everything for everyone, but in the end it's okay to just be yourself." She smiled at him, the weight of her internal struggle lifting just a little. "Thank you, Keanu. Honestly, you've given me more than just a photo today." Keanu gave her a nod, feeling an unexpected sense of connection. Maybe this encounter wasn't just about her taking a picture with him. Maybe, just maybe, it was about them both finding a little clarity in the middle of their busy, chaotic lives. "I think you'll be okay," he said, giving her a warm smile. "Just don't forget to take care of yourself too. Sometimes it's okay to take a step back." She took a deep breath and nodded. "I'll try. Thanks again, Mr. Reeves. And I'll make sure your registration issue doesn't get in the way of anything." Keanu's eyes widened slightly. "Wait, you mean you're not going to—" She grinned almost sheepishly. "Consider it a warning. You're good to go." Keanu laughed, grateful for the unexpected kindness. "Well, in that case, I'll take it. Thanks, officer." She waved as he started his car, her face lighting up with a smile. "Take care, Keanu." As Keanu drove off into the night, he couldn't help but reflect on the strange turn of events. A random traffic stop had somehow turned into a moment of self-reflection, not just for Officer Harris, but for him as well. Maybe this was a sign that sometimes the universe worked in mysterious ways, and sometimes the people you meet along the way have a way of shifting your perspective, even when you least expect it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Keanu's mind buzzed as he drove through the quiet streets of Los Angeles, the hum of the engine the only sound filling the car. Officer Harris had caught him off guard in a way he hadn't expected. Sure, he was used to meeting fans. He'd been a public figure for decades, after all. But this encounter felt different. There was something about the way she had opened up to him, the way she had seen him not just as an actor, but as someone who understood struggle and the weight of expectations. He didn't know why, but the words she had shared with him about losing herself in the chaos of life kept replaying in his mind. It reminded him of the times he had felt overwhelmed, when it seemed like the world was too much to handle. He had always tried to stay grounded, but there were days when even he felt lost. As he turned onto a less crowded road, Keanu found himself thinking about the bigger picture. There was a time when he would have been wrapped up in the fast pace of his career, constantly moving from one project to the next. But after the unexpected twists his life had taken, he had come to realize that the most important thing wasn't fame or success. It was peace of mind and the ability to live authentically. That's what he had been trying to remind Officer Harris, he realized. It wasn't just about keeping up with the world's demands. It was about staying true to yourself. Amidst the noise, Keanu pulled into his driveway, the soft glow of his home welcoming him back. He didn't immediately get out of the car, though. His mind was still on the interaction with Officer Harris. There was something about the way she had approached him, as if their paths had crossed for a reason. He had a feeling this wasn't the last time they would meet. As if on cue, his phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. He checked the screen and saw a message from a familiar number. Officer Harris. "Hey, Keanu, it's Officer Harris. I just wanted to thank you again for the conversation. You helped me see things from a different perspective. I'll never forget it. Hope you're doing well. Take care." He smiled, touched by her message. It wasn't just a casual fan note. It felt more like a small but meaningful connection. Maybe, she hadn't realized it, but her openness had made an impact on him too. It had been a long time since he'd had a real conversation like that with someone outside of his circle. He typed out a quick reply. "You're welcome. I'm glad I could help. Take care of yourself, okay? And remember, it's okay to take a break when you need it." Keanu put his phone down and stepped out of the car, heading into the house. He had, to admit, the unpredictability of the night had brought a sense of unexpected clarity. Maybe he had been so caught up in his own world, he hadn't noticed how much people, real people, just wanted a moment of honesty and connection. The next day, Keanu woke up to a new sense of purpose. His mind wandered back to the brief interaction with Officer Harris, but something more pressing lingered. There was always a chance that their paths could cross again. After all, this city had a way of intertwining lives in ways people didn't expect. It wasn't just about his fame anymore. He had something to offer that was deeper than just his career. Perhaps it was time to share more of himself, more of his struggles and his journey. But what exactly would that look like? The thought stayed with him as he went through his day. He hadn't made any specific plans yet, but he had a feeling that this shift in perspective was just the beginning. Maybe it was time to stop hiding behind the image of the perfect Hollywood actor and show people something more real. As Keanu settled into his routine, he found himself thinking about the importance of connection. Officer Harris had been so open with him, and her vulnerability had sparked something inside him. In a world that often felt distant and disconnected, moments of honesty were rare and precious, and even though their interaction had started with an unexpected stop, it had turned into something deeper, something meaningful. That night, after finishing a few phone calls and work-related tasks, Keanu sat down at his kitchen table. He pulled out a notebook, something he had kept for years. It was filled with random thoughts, scribbles, and ideas. He had always used it to jot down notes whenever a thought hit him, but tonight it felt like more than just a simple diary entry. He flipped to a fresh page and started to write. What does it really mean to stay true to yourself? Keanu stared at the question for a moment, then began writing his thoughts. It wasn't about fame, it wasn't about accolades. It was about staying grounded, staying connected to what mattered. It was about those rare moments when you let yourself be vulnerable with others. As he wrote, he found himself reflecting on his own life, the highs and lows and the lessons he had learned along the way. He realized that being authentic wasn't something that just happened. It was a conscious choice, a choice to be real, even when the world expected something different. By the time he finished writing, he felt a sense of clarity wash over him. Maybe he wasn't the perfect example of an idealized public figure. Maybe he wasn't supposed to be, but what he could offer was real, raw, and relatable. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The next few days went by in a blur for Keanu. The quiet peace that had settled over him after the encounter with Officer Harris had given way to a strange feeling, something he couldn't quite explain, but something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as though the universe had given him a little push towards something he hadn't considered before. A realization that it wasn't just about what he could do for his fans or for his career. It was about what he could do for himself. It wasn't until a few days later that he heard from Officer Harris again. Her message had come unexpectedly, this time with a tone that felt more official, more urgent. "Hey, Keanu, I hope this isn't too out of the blue, but I was wondering if you might be willing to do something for me. It's a bit unconventional, but hear me out. We're starting a new community project for local youth and young adults here in LA, and I think your voice could really make an impact. I know you're busy, but if you'd be open to helping, I'd love to talk more about it." Keanu read the message several times before he responded. He hadn't expected to hear from Officer Harris so soon, but the thought of giving back to the community, particularly in a way that felt real and meaningful, was something that sparked his interest. He had always done charity work, but this was something different. He quickly typed back, "I'd love to learn more about it. Let's set up a time to talk." Within minutes, she replied, suggesting a meeting the next afternoon at a local community center in the heart of Los Angeles. It wasn't a place he was unfamiliar with, but it was definitely a step out of his usual routine. The following day, Keanu drove to the center, feeling a mix of curiosity and a bit of nervousness. The idea of joining a community project wasn't new to him, but something about this felt different. Maybe it was the personal connection he had with Officer Harris, or maybe it was just the growing sense that he wanted to do something more with his time than just the usual Hollywood charades. When he arrived, he was greeted by Harris outside the center, her face lighting up as soon as she saw him. There was no trace of the nervousness she'd shown during their first meeting. Instead, she seemed more confident, even a little proud. "Hey, Keanu," she said, offering him a handshake. "Thanks for coming. I'm glad you're interested." Keanu shook her hand and smiled. "Of course. I've been thinking about what you said, and I'd like to learn more." She led him inside, where a group of young adults were gathered in a circle. The space was humble but filled with warmth, bright walls with art made by the local youth, motivational posters scattered around, and a community vibe that felt real. Keanu could feel the energy of the room immediately, something he hadn't experienced in a while. "This is the team," Harris said, introducing him to the group of young people, most of whom looked to be in their late teens or early 20s. "They're part of the program we're starting to help mentor the next generation of leaders, artists, and entrepreneurs in LA. We want to give them the tools they need to succeed, and most importantly, we want them to feel like they matter." Keanu nodded, taking in the diverse group of individuals, each of them carrying a different story, but all of them clearly eager to be part of something larger than themselves. He could tell just by looking at them that they had their own struggles, their own dreams, and that this program was a way for them to see that there was a path forward. Harris turned to Keanu. "What we were hoping for is that you could come in, maybe share your story and just talk about your experiences. It doesn't have to be some big presentation, just a conversation. We want them to see that even someone like you had to face challenges, doubts, and moments where you weren't sure what was next." Keanu stood there for a moment, considering her words. It wasn't exactly the glamorous Hollywood event he was used to, but there was something about this that felt more authentic. He wasn't going to be performing or playing a character. He was just Keanu talking to people who were looking for real, raw inspiration. "I can do that," he said, finally nodding. "It's not about the glitz and glamour, right? It's about showing up. I'll do it." The group broke into applause, and Keanu couldn't help but feel a little humbled. It wasn't the fame or accolades that they were after. It was something far more valuable. They wanted connection. They wanted someone to show them that they could make it through their struggles just like he had. As he spoke with them, Keanu shared stories from his life, stories about his early struggles in Hollywood, the doubts he had faced, and the failures that had nearly broken him. He told them about the times he had questioned his career choices, his purpose, and even his ability to keep going. He spoke about the importance of resilience, of learning from failure, and of staying true to yourself even when the world seemed to push you in 1,000 different directions. The more Keanu spoke, the more he realized how much he had needed this conversation himself. His words seemed to resonate not just with the group but with him as well. It wasn't often that he got to open up like this, without an audience or a camera present. It felt good, freeing even. After the session, Harris came up to him with a grin. "I knew it would be good," she said, "but I didn't expect it to be this powerful. You really connected with them." Keanu smiled, looking around at the group. They were still chatting, exchanging ideas and laughing together. "It was exactly what I needed too," he admitted. "Maybe this is where I'm supposed to be," Keanu added, a sense of clarity beginning to wash over him. "Maybe this is where I make a real difference." The next few weeks unfolded like a dream, or maybe it was more like the beginning of something entirely new. Keanu had never imagined that one simple encounter with Officer Harris would lead him to this new chapter. But as he spent more time with the community center's team, he realized how much his involvement had begun to shape his perspective on life. Every week, Keanu made time to visit the center. He found himself connecting more with the young people there, hearing their stories and sharing his own in return. Each meeting was a mix of stories, advice, and laughter. It wasn't a Hollywood script. It was raw, real, and full of genuine emotion. On one of his visits, Keanu was invited to sit in on a group discussion. The topic of the day was finding your voice. The young adults in the circle each had their own stories of struggle. Some came from broken families, others had been through hardships with addiction or mental health challenges, but they all shared a common thread. They were looking for something that would give them purpose. As Keanu listened, he could feel a deep connection to each one of them. He remembered being at a crossroads in his life, uncertain of where he was going or what was next. There had been moments where he felt like an imposter in his own life, questioning his worth, his impact, and his direction. But now, standing in front of these young adults, he knew that his journey hadn't been for nothing. If anything, it had given him the tools to help others. After the discussion, Keanu took a seat on the edge of the room. Harris approached him, her eyes gleaming with appreciation. "You've made such an impact here," she said, her voice warm. "I think they really needed to hear from you. Not just the Keanu Reeves everyone knows, but the real you, the struggles, the growth. It's helping them see they're not alone." Keanu nodded thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm learning just as much from them as they are. From me." Officer Harris smiled and handed him a flyer. "We're doing a fundraising event next month to support the center, and we were hoping you could be a part of it. It's going to be a more casual gathering. Nothing fancy, but it'll bring the community together. We want to raise awareness, get the word out about what we're doing here, and maybe even provide some financial support." Keanu took the flyer, his mind spinning. He had never been the type of person to attend flashy fundraisers, but the idea of doing something real for the people who had given him so much was something he couldn't pass up. It was an opportunity to further support the cause, to help these young people, and to build something lasting. "I'd be honored to be a part of it," he said without hesitation. "Just tell me when and where, and I'll be there." As the weeks passed, the fundraising event quickly became the talk of the center. The idea was simple, an afternoon gathering with food, music, and activities for the local families. The main focus, though, was bringing the community together to show their support for the youth center and the programs it offered. It wasn't about big names or extravagant donations. It was about building connections and offering opportunities to those who needed them most. The night before the event, Keanu found himself in a quiet moment of reflection. He sat on the porch of his home, the soft hum of the city in the background, and thought about everything that had led him to this point. He had lived a life that many could only dream of, acclaimed movies, fame, and success. But there was something about this that felt deeper, more meaningful, something he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, Keanu was beginning to feel like he was exactly where he needed to be. The day of the event, he arrived at the center early, eager to see how everything would unfold. The atmosphere was different from the usual Hollywood glam. There was an unspoken sense of unity in the air. The young people from the center were busy setting up, laughing and chatting as they prepared for the guests. The smell of barbecue and fresh fruit filled the air, and the sound of live music echoed through the streets. As the event began, Keanu walked around, greeting people, chatting with the families, and watching as the community came together. It wasn't about him. It was about the people in this neighborhood who had come together to support something bigger than themselves. At one point, he was asked to speak in front of the crowd. His heart raced a little, not because he was nervous, but because he knew that the words he said could mean something to these people. He took the microphone, his eyes scanning the crowd of familiar faces. "I never thought I'd be standing here today talking about something like this. For most of my life, I've been focused on the world of movies, but it wasn't until I came here to this center that I realized there's so much more that matters. What I've learned from all of you, the young people here, the families, and especially from Officer Harris, is that it's about connection. It's about being there for one another, lifting each other up, and showing up when it counts." Keanu paused, looking around the crowd. "I've had a lot of success in my life, but nothing has felt as real and as meaningful as this. This is where we all come together. Whether you're young or old, whether you're struggling or thriving, we all have something to offer." There was a brief silence, and then the crowd erupted into applause. Later that day, Keanu sat down with Harris, watching as the event continued. She caught his eye, a look of gratitude on her face. "You've really become a part of this family," she said quietly. "We couldn't have asked for a better partner." In all of this, Keanu smiled, his heart full. "I think this is just the beginning. We have a lot more work to do." It wasn't the typical ending of a Hollywood story, but in that moment, Keanu realized that maybe the most meaningful stories weren't the ones played out on the big screen. The real stories, the ones that truly changed lives, happened when people showed up for each other, when they shared their vulnerabilities, their struggles, and their triumphs. As the sun began to set over the community center, Keanu felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known in years. This wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about making a difference, no matter how small. And for the first time in a long time, Keanu Reeves felt like he had truly found his place. The weeks that followed the fundraiser were filled with a renewed sense of purpose for Keanu. Each visit to the community center was a reminder of what really mattered. The connections, the stories, and the struggles that shaped the lives of the young people he had come to know. It wasn't just about the work they were doing together. It was about the shared humanity that bound them. He continued to spend time with Officer Harris, not only talking about the progress of the center, but also reflecting on how much he had learned through this experience. He had always been the guy who kept to himself, who stayed behind the camera or in the safety of his private life. But now he felt more connected to the world around him. It wasn't the Hollywood parties or the red carpets that fulfilled him. It was moments like this, genuine, meaningful exchanges where he could give something back. One afternoon, Officer Harris invited him to sit in on a group therapy session. It was a part of the center's initiative to provide mental health support to young adults in the community, and it was something that hit close to home for Keanu. He had dealt with his own struggles with grief and loss, and he knew how important it was to have a space where people could open up without fear of judgment. Keanu sat quietly in the back of the room, observing as one of the youth counselors guided the group through a conversation. Each person shared their experience, whether it was dealing with the trauma of losing a loved one, overcoming addiction, or navigating family struggles. Keanu was struck by the rawness of their words. They weren't seeking sympathy. They were seeking understanding, a shared space to heal. The session ended and the group gathered around in a circle, speaking to one another with a sense of camaraderie. Keanu felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the space they had created. He wasn't just there as an actor or a celebrity. He was there as a human being who had faced his own demons and come out stronger on the other side. And he wanted these young people to know that they too could get through anything. Afterward, Officer Harris pulled him aside, her face serious. "Keanu, I know we've been talking about ways to make this center grow, but I need to ask you something. Would you be willing to take on a bigger role? We've got a chance to expand. More programs, more support, but it's going to take a lot of resources and we're going to need all the help we can get." Keanu thought about it for a moment. He had already been giving his time and energy to the cause, but this was different. It wasn't just about showing up, it was about stepping up in a more significant way. He could see how passionate Harris was, and he knew that the center's growth wasn't just about providing programs. It was about giving these young people a fighting chance to change their lives. "I'm in," Keanu said without hesitation, "whatever it takes." The announcement of Keanu's increased involvement at the center spread quickly. It wasn't just about the financial support he could bring. It was about the message his participation sent. Keanu wasn't the typical Hollywood star who flitted in and out of causes for the sake of his image. He was committed to seeing change in a way that went beyond appearances. And that message was loud and clear. The media caught wind of it, but this time the attention didn't feel invasive. It didn't feel like a publicity stunt. The coverage on Keanu's involvement with the community center emphasized his commitment, not his fame. People began to take notice of the real impactful work happening at the center. Donations started pouring in, not just from Keanu's wealth, but from others who were inspired by his actions. It was the beginning of a larger movement, one that was fueled by genuine connections, not just headlines. The center's programs expanded, offering more after-school activities, mentorship opportunities, and a safe space for young people to find support. Keanu's role in the center became more hands-on as he helped organize events and speak at fundraisers. He even began working with local schools, talking to students about overcoming obstacles and finding their path in life. But it was more than just giving speeches. It was about showing up, being present, and letting these young people know that their voices mattered. Keanu's involvement also led to something else he hadn't expected, a deepened friendship with Officer Harris. They often found themselves talking late into the night, discussing everything from their personal lives to the future of the center. He had come to respect her not only as a colleague, but as a person, someone who, despite all the difficulties she faced in her job, still managed to make a real difference in the lives of those around her. One evening, as they stood together on the roof of the community center, watching the sunset over the city, Harris spoke up. "I never expected any of this, Keanu. When I first met you, I had no idea we'd be standing here doing this together. I always knew we had the potential to do something great, but you've taken this to a level I never imagined." Keanu smiled, softly, his gaze lingering on the horizon. "It's not just me. It's all of us. You're the one who got this started. You're the one who brought all of us together." Harris looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "Maybe, but you helped us see what it means to have hope. You've reminded us that no matter where we come from or what we've been through, there's always a way forward." Keanu's heart warmed at her words. This wasn't the kind of recognition he was used to. It wasn't about applause or headlines. It was about making a real difference, one life at a time. That night, as Keanu left the center and drove home, he realized just how much had changed. He had come to Los Angeles all those years ago with a dream of stardom, of fame, of leaving a legacy. But now he was building something entirely different, a legacy that was about more than just his name. It was about the lives he touched, the people he helped, and the hope he had sparked in those who needed it most. As the months rolled on, Keanu's involvement with the community center grew deeper and more personal. His time was no longer divided between flashy premieres and behind-the-scenes Hollywood drama. Instead, his focus had shifted to something far more fulfilling, the work he was doing with Officer Harris and the center's programs. The community had become his new stage, and he wasn't acting. It was the most authentic role he had ever played, but with greater involvement came greater responsibility. As the center grew, so did the challenges. They had expanded their programs to include job training, mental health counseling, and even a music program for young people looking to express themselves through art. But the funding wasn't always guaranteed, and they faced constant hurdles. There were times when Keanu would leave meetings feeling drained, wondering if they would be able to keep the lights on for another month. One particular week, they faced a setback that shook the entire team. A large donation they had been counting on fell through at the last minute, leaving them scrambling to make up the difference. The pressure mounted, and Keanu found himself questioning how much longer they could keep up the momentum. During a tense meeting at the center, Keanu was sitting at the back of the room, quietly listening as Harris addressed the group. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by an air of uncertainty. She was doing everything she could to keep things together, but even she knew they were at a breaking point. "I'm not sure how much longer we can keep going at this pace," Harris admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to find a solution, and fast." Keanu sat in silence, feeling a knot tighten in his chest. He had always believed in the cause, but seeing the weight of it fall on Harris and the other staff members made him feel helpless. He knew that the people in this room were giving everything they had, but sometimes giving wasn't enough when the resources weren't there. That night, after the meeting, Keanu walked outside to clear his mind. He stepped into the cool evening air, the lights of the city twinkling in the distance. He felt overwhelmed, like the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. He was used to solving problems, but this was different. This was something personal. He had built something real here, something that couldn't be replaced by money or fame. And if they couldn't find a way to keep the center open, all of it would be gone. As he walked along the sidewalk, Keanu's mind raced. He thought about all the lives the center had touched, all the young people who had found their purpose because of this place. He couldn't let it go. Not now. not when they were so close, to making a real impact. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Officer Harris. "We need to talk. It's urgent. Call me when you can." Keanu's heart sank as he dialed her number. The conversation that followed was one he wasn't prepared for. "Keanu," Harris said, her voice tight, "I don't know how to say this, but we might have to close the center down. We've done everything we can, but the money isn't there. The community believes in what we're doing, but without the funding, it's just not sustainable. I think we're out of options." Keanu's breath caught in his throat. He had known things were getting tough, but hearing it from Harris, who had dedicated so much of her life to this, was a gut punch. The realization hit him like a wave. He couldn't just walk away. He couldn't let it end like this. After a long pause, Keanu finally spoke. "I'm not ready to give up on this. We've come too far, Harris. I know it seems impossible, right? And now, but there's got to be another way." Harris was silent for a moment, and Keanu could hear the weight of her exhaustion. "I don't know what else to do. It feels like everything we've worked for is slipping through our fingers." Keanu took a deep breath, his mind working quickly. What if we try something bigger? What if we make this into something people can't ignore? What if we tell the real story behind the center and the work we're doing? We have to go outside our comfort zone. Let's show people why this matters, not just the Hollywood crowd, but everyone. People who've been in the same position, who know how hard it is to get by without the right support. Harris paused. "You mean like a public campaign?" "Exactly. A way to show that we're not just a Hollywood thing, we're a community, a movement. People will want to be a part of it once they see the impact we're having." The idea felt right. It felt like the spark they needed to reignite the momentum. Harris agreed, and the plan began to take shape. Keanu would leverage his platform to bring more attention to the center, using social media and his connections in the entertainment industry to rally support. The campaign kicked off with a video Keanu created himself. He didn't want it to be polished or scripted. He wanted it to feel raw and real. In the video, he spoke directly to the camera, sharing his personal connection to the center and the impact it had on his life. He talked about the importance of supporting the community and how crucial it was for young people to have access to resources that would help them build a better future. The video went viral almost instantly. Fans, fellow celebrities, and even people who had never heard of the center before began donating and sharing the message. Keanu's honesty and vulnerability struck a chord with people. This wasn't about a rich actor trying to make himself look good. It was about a man who had seen the difference a community could make and wanted to ensure that others had the same opportunity. As donations poured in, Keanu and Harris worked tirelessly to ensure that the center could stay open. They partnered with local businesses, organized fundraising events, and even reached out to other organizations that could help. Keanu knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was more determined than ever to keep the center alive. The turning point came one rainy afternoon when Keanu received an email that would change everything. The email came from a large non-profit organization that had been following the center's progress and the recent campaign. They had been so moved by the outpouring of support that they were willing to offer a significant donation to keep the programs running for the next year. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was enough to give them the time they needed to secure more funding and continue their work. Keanu sat back in his chair, reading the email over and over again, a smile creeping across his face. This was it. They had made it through the hardest part. And though the battle was far from over, Keanu knew that with people like Harris by his side and the support of the community, they would overcome anything that came their way. The center was saved, and with it, the dreams of so many young people were too. The weeks after the big donation were filled with excitement and a renewed sense of optimism at the community center. The staff worked harder than ever, and Keanu's commitment was unwavering. They had managed to secure the funding they needed for the next year, but Keanu knew better than anyone that this victory, while monumental, was only a temporary solution. The struggle wasn't over. It had only just begun. It was a brisk morning when Keanu sat down with Officer Harris to discuss their next steps. The center had expanded its programs. But now they faced the challenge of sustainability. They needed to keep the momentum going, build relationships with other potential donors, and make sure that every penny they received was used wisely. "I don't know if we're ready for this," Harris said, running her fingers through her hair. "The pressure is already starting to feel like it's piling up again. There's so much more to do than I ever realized." Keanu nodded in understanding. "It's not just about the money, Harris, it's about the people. We have to show them that we're not going anywhere, that we've got a vision for the future. That's where I think we're falling short. We need to make it clear that we're here to stay and that we've got a plan." Harris sighed, leaning back in her chair. "You're right, but sometimes it feels like we're constantly running on fumes. We've been able to bring in support, but it's so hard to make sure that everyone stays committed in the long run." Keanu thought for a moment, then spoke with the same determination that had propelled him to act in the first place. "What if we create a more permanent system? A coalition of people who can support this center, not just financially but in every way. Volunteers, mentors, businesses. People who believe in the cause and want to keep it alive for years to come. We need to think bigger." Harris looked up, her eyes filled with hope. "A coalition, I like that. But how do we even start?" Keanu smiled. "We start with the people who already believe in what we're doing. We keep asking for help, keep showing up, and we keep telling the story. When you have people who are personally invested in a mission, they'll fight for it." Keanu threw himself into building this new vision. He worked closely with Harris and the team to create a coalition, reaching out to local businesses, influencers, and other organizations that shared the center's mission. The response was overwhelming. As people began to see how the center had grown and how it was making a tangible difference, they couldn't help but get involved. But for Keanu, the hardest part wasn't securing the funding. It was seeing the faces of the young people who walked through the center's doors every day. He had become more than just a celebrity for them. He had become a mentor, a role model, and he knew that they needed more than just resources. They needed real guidance, someone who could teach them the value of hard work and perseverance. One afternoon, Keanu met with a young man named Marcus, who had been attending the center's job training program. Marcus had been living in a rough neighborhood and had struggled to stay on track. But since joining the center, he had shown significant progress. He was working part-time, finishing his high school diploma, and even talking about starting his own business one day. Keanu sat across from Marcus in the center's lounge, where the walls were lined with inspirational quotes and colorful artwork created by the young people in the programs. "You're doing great, Marcus," Keanu said, smiling. "But you've got more potential than you even realize. I've seen people like you come and go, and it's clear that you've got the drive to make something of yourself." Marcus looked down, his hands fidgeting with a pen. "I don't know, man. Sometimes I still feel like I'm not good enough, like I'm just waiting for everything to fall apart again. I've been let down a lot in my life." Keanu leaned forward, his tone serious but encouraging. "I get it, Marcus. Life isn't easy, and there are always going to be setbacks. But you can't let those setbacks define you. You've got the ability to push through. Every time you think about quitting, think about why you started. You've already come so far." Marcus met his gaze, his eyes searching for a sense of clarity. "You really think I can do it?" Keanu smiled warmly. "I know you can, and you're not alone in this. You've got a community that's behind. You people who care about your future. We're all in this together." As the months passed, Keanu's message of perseverance and hope resonated with the young people at the center. They weren't just learning job skills or how to express themselves through art. They were learning to believe in themselves. And with each small victory, the community grew stronger. But even as the center's influence began to expand, Keanu couldn't ignore the internal struggles he faced. He was still dealing with the aftermath of the tragic loss that had pushed him into this work in the first place. He had made peace with it, but some days the weight of it all felt heavy. One night, as he sat in his car after a long day at the center, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. The thought of all the lives he had touched and the impact the center had made on those who needed it most made him feel a sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. But it was also overwhelming, the constant push to do more, to be more, to ensure that no one slipped through the cracks. Keanu took a deep breath, wiping away a tear. He had learned that doing meaningful work didn't come without sacrifice, and yet the reward wasn't in the accolades, it was in the faces of those who had found their path again, who had found hope in the most unlikely of places. He had no idea what the future would hold for him or for the center, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't walking away. Not now, not ever. The center had become more than just a place for people to learn and grow. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people came together. Keanu's role had evolved from being a celebrity to being a real leader, someone who understood the struggle, who lived the mission he preached. But, as with any journey, there were still hurdles to overcome. The pressure to keep the center afloat had grown heavier. Donations had slowed after the initial surge of excitement, and now, as the next year loomed on the horizon, Keanu and Officer Harris found themselves scrambling once again to secure the center's future. But something had shifted. Instead of feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders, Keanu felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew the importance of the work, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. One morning, as Keanu walked into the center, he saw a group of young people gathered in the art room, painting and laughing. It was a simple scene, but it reminded him of everything they had worked for. He smiled and walked over to join them, his heart swelling with pride. These were the moments that made it all worth it, the moments that proved their efforts weren't in vain. Harris approached him, her expression serious. "Keanu, we need to talk." Keanu nodded, his smile fading. "What's going on, Harris?" "We've got another challenge coming our way," she said. "A new zoning law might affect our ability to keep the center open. It's the kind of thing we didn't even see coming. They're saying we might have to shut down part of the facility to comply." Keanu felt his stomach drop. After everything they had been through, this new obstacle felt like a punch to the gut. He could already hear the doubts creeping in. What if this was the end? What if all their hard work had been for nothing? "Tell me what we're up against," Keanu said, trying to steady his voice. Harris explained the situation. The city had implemented a new law that restricted the type of programs they could offer in certain zones. The community center had been grandfathered in, but now it was facing bureaucratic red tape that could force them to close part of their facilities or make costly adjustments that would drain their funds. Keanu paced for a moment, his mind racing. He couldn't let this happen. They had come too far. He had seen firsthand how much this place meant to these kids, these families. The thought of losing it all made his chest tighten. "We're not letting this go," Keanu said, his voice firm. "We'll fight it. We'll do whatever it takes." Harris raised an eyebrow. "Do you have a plan?" Keanu looked at her and smiled. "We're going to do what we do best. We're going to rally the community. We'll get people involved. We'll show them why this center matters. This isn't just about us. This is about all the kids, all the families who rely on us." Over the next few weeks, Keanu and Harris launched a new campaign, this time focusing on the city's zoning issue. They enlisted the help of local businesses, community leaders, and of course the young people who had benefited from the center's programs. It wasn't just about saving a building. It was about making sure the community's voices were heard. Keanu appeared at local town hall meetings, speaking passionately about the center's impact. He shared stories of young people who had found their purpose, who had turned their lives around with the support they received. He wasn't there as a celebrity trying to win a popularity contest. He was there as someone who truly cared. And slowly the tide began to turn. People started showing up at meetings, signing petitions, and calling their local representatives. The center became a cause célèbre, with support pouring in from all corners of the city. The media picked up the story, and soon Keanu was being interviewed by news outlets, all asking him the same question. Why was this fight so important to him? Keanu's answer was always the same. Because this place isn't just a community center. It's a lifeline. It's where people come to find hope, and we can't afford to let that go. Finally, the day came when the city council voted on the zoning issue. Keanu, Harris, and the community gathered in the packed council chambers, waiting for the decision. The room was tense, and Keanu's nerves were on edge. He had seen so much, progress, but the thought of everything slipping away at the last minute kept him on edge. The mayor stood at the podium, reading the vote results aloud. The room held its breath. "And the vote passes," the mayor announced. "The zoning law will be amended to allow for the continued operation of the community center, with all programs intact. The council recognizes the vital role this facility plays in our community." The room erupted in cheers. Keanu's heart soared as he looked around at the people he had fought so hard for. It wasn't just a win for the center, it was a win for everyone who had supported it, for every young person whose future had just been secured. Keanu turned to Harris, who was wiping tears from her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. Keanu grinned. "No, we did it. All of us." In the months that followed, the center continued to grow, expanding its programs and deepening its impact. Keanu's role shifted again. He wasn't just the face of the campaign anymore. He was a partner in the fight. He worked alongside Harris and the rest of the team, ensuring that the center was more than just a place for people to gather. It was a true beacon of hope. As for Keanu, he had found his true calling. He had once been known for his action-packed roles in Hollywood, but now he was known for something far more meaningful, for being a man who didn't give up, for being a man who used his platform to make the world a better place. And in the quiet moments, when he watched the young people at the center laughing, learning, and growing, he knew that everything he had done, the fights, the late nights, the struggles, had all been worth it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?